Hi, and welcome to my first tutorial. I'm going to talk you through the drawing and painting of this model, Trisha, from posespace.com. So I'm starting off quite loose. At the moment, I'm not using any drawing guides at all. I will use a grid eventually, but for now, I'm just kind of lightly sketching out where I want things to go. So I can try to just have a bit of like an organic sense of placement, and you can see this direction line going up through her torso, just to kind of get a sense of movement and just to keep that sense of freedom in there for as long as possible before I refine it. This is obviously like sped up a bit. I'm sketching quite quickly, but kind of just adding in just structural lines. At the moment it's like scaffolding more than anything else, and I'm kind of referring to the photo more than to anatomy at this stage, which maybe is not the best idea, but because this one is eventually going to be a series of 24 views of the same model, I've kind of gone for placement rather than that real sense of anatomy at the early stages. That will come later. So for now, as I say, just sketching out with a pencil brush. It's actually from the set by a guy called Jing. So it's the Jing Clean Sketch Brush, which it's not like vastly different to the default pencil brushes, but I just kind of find it a bit smoother to write and draw with. So I like to use that for my sketches. None of that will be there in the final image, so it doesn't matter too much, whatever you're comfortable with. So yeah, at the moment I'm kind of like working on 3 or 4 layers at the drawing stage. I'm not just doing one drawing layer. I'm doing a very rough layer, then working on top of that with a slightly more refined one, and then another refined one now. And now what I'm doing is I now do have a drawing guide up. I've got a grid over, just so I can kind of make sure that I've got the placement of the features and the pose just pretty much spot on. As you can see, I'm refining it quite a bit here. At this stage you can be as detailed or as loose as you like. Sometimes I like to keep more of a drawing feel to it, like as if it's almost like a movie poster kind of drawing with some thin transparent paint on it. In that case I'd work the drawing up into a very detailed full tonal drawing. But for this, because I really want to have a quite realistic painting, I'm just kind of marking out where I want things to go, and I'm not worried too much about getting all of the values up because I'm going to get that through paint. But yeah, as you can see, this is now on about the 4th layer, and I am going for some details right now, just so I've got the best kind of the best structure to work with. And yeah, just lightly marking in some areas of shadow. And you can see, even though it's not looking like a solid shape, you can see that I've marked out where it will be solid. Just scribbling in a bit of shading there. And for the necklace there, I'm kind of I'm using the shape tool to get the ellipses that I want and the arcs. And there we go. I'll be starting the painting stage very soon. And for that, I like to stick with a limited palette. I'm very tempted all the time to go overboard with colours, and it can mean that the painting doesn't look very coherent. So what I do here, is I get a palette of a base colour, 4 or 5 like kind of variations on that. Some warmth colours for just the areas that are kind of pressing up against the flesh or against bones, like elbows, lips, cheekbones, etc. Have a bit more warmth in them. Some shadows, which I try to keep as light as possible for as long as possible, because it's very easy to find yourself pushed towards black very quickly. I try to avoid that. Some of the shadows will be very dark in this, but I want to wait as long as possible before going that dark. And then I have some highlights, which again I try to keep not as bright, less bright than they could be for as long as possible, because once you've gone to the brightest white, there's nowhere you can go. Just roughly painting in some backgrounds here, trying to get a bit of texture. And I've got my palette on my swatch, and yeah, I'm just laying in some base colour with a turpentine brush. None of that texture will remain visible, but just psychologically it gives me a sense that I'm going to go for a painterly feel, even though it's not going to stay like that. And yeah, as you can see, I'm kind of, even my darkest areas of shadow at the moment, I'm blending in and just trying to get a sense of where the shadows are rather than going as dark as I want. So rather than like finish one area of the painting, I tend to try to work it all up at once at different stages, so you can kind of see that the drawing will come together kind of overall at the same time, rather than it being like, oh, the face is now finished, the eye is now finished. And hopefully that will help it to stay fairly coherent and look like it all fits together. And yeah, I'm blending fairly carefully. I'm just kind of marking down some colour with any brush at the moment, because it's really the blending where I get the feel that I want. So a lot of people ask, what brush do you use for a specific effect? For me, the effect is more achieved by pushing the paint around, really. So you don't really see much left of a particular brush. It's more just that, like, I work into it with the blend tool until I've got the gradation of colours that I'm happy with. And I can do that with any brush. I have some preferences. I tend to use the flat brush, the Nico rule, and then for blending, I use an airbrush, soft airbrush a lot of the time. And yeah, I'm starting to lay in some darker darks now. There's a bit of warmth you can see that I've applied around the cheekbones and the eyes. And that's kind of also, if you look at where her right thigh is kind of where the bone is kind of poking through, or not poking through, but where the bone is prominent, that's a little bit warmer as well. And at the moment it's looking, although it's looking quite sculptural, which is the effect I'm going for, it's looking very much like it's made out of dough or clay or something, rather than a solid body in space. I'm holding off on putting any highlights in at all for the time being, and that's just a personal choice where I really like the way that highlights pop out at the end. It's almost like a rewarding stage of the drawing where after holding back you get to put in these like very bright reflections and just areas of warmth, and it just suddenly makes the painting pop out, and you'll see what I mean a bit later. And what I tend to do is paint on a layer above my most active layer. So I'll kind of work on a completely blank layer for almost every series of brush strokes I make. I'll partly blend that on its layer by itself, then I'll merge down and gently blend it in with the layer below, and then start a new layer again. So I'm kind of always adding brush strokes onto a clear layer, so I'm always giving myself a bit of leeway to go back or to change what I'm doing. So it's kind of, it allows me a bit of experimentation time without kind of committing to anything. And yeah, here I think I'm working on the hand. Yeah, working on the hand there. I think I spent quite a lot of time trying to get that. I'm not sure I entirely nailed it. What I would do again, or what I would do next time, is I'd maybe use a slightly different base colour for the hands. I'm blending in a slightly different direction because her hands are mostly in light, so they're just kind of overall a little bit shifted towards the yellow rather than towards the red side of things. So when blending, it would be easier if I'm not trying to bring that back, I think. So it took me a bit of time to get anywhere near happy with that. Not 100% happy with how the hands ended up, but they're okay for this painting, I think. And even these smaller details I'm doing with just the flat brush and then blending in. Maybe some with a pencil that I then blend in. But it's all kind of, it's all just about the blending for me and about pushing the paint around the canvas. This necklace that I think I'm going to start working on fairly soon in the process. At one stage I was unsure whether I'd include that, but overall the shadows that it casts are just kind of adding so much to the solidity of the picture that I went for it. And I'm really glad I did, because I think it kind of just helps add a lot of structure to that area that's otherwise a little bit muddy and a little bit unclear. I think it just helps bring it together when I start working on that. And yeah, a little bit on the hair. I use the same brushes for the hair as for everything else. A flat brush or Nico rule, is that how you pronounce it? And kind of blend it in when I'm happy. I'm marking out the bigger shapes. I'm adding some brighter areas that I'm then blending in. Just looking for the flow of the hair, not worried too much about individual strands. What I'm not doing is going straight in with one of the hair brushes. If you paint hair from the start with a hairbrush, it's going to end up looking pretty ropey a lot of the time, because really that's for touch-ups and for kind of last touches to just imply a strand of hair. It's not, you can't really paint the whole hair with it. It's a kind of big shift in realising that brush doesn't really perform that function very well. It's good for touch-ups though, and I will use that a bit. But again, I find that the flat brush, the airbrush, the pencil, all perfectly good at rendering hair. As long as you just have an idea of what you want to do with that. That's the main thing really. I don't think there's any brush that will do the job for you. And if it does, it's probably worth avoiding it until you can do that process yourself. It was definitely only when I left the hairbrushes behind for a bit that I myself got a bit more confident in drawing hair. I'm still not where I'd like to be with it. I think the hair ends up looking a little bit cartoony, a little bit video gamey, when everything else is a bit more painterly. But it's kind of getting there. It's a lot further than it was a year or so ago. And that's all you can really compare yourself with you of a year ago. And yes, I'm working on the necklace here now, as you can see. Starting with the darks, then adding some highlights, but nothing too bright. And again, this is zoomed right in. And I kind of just embraced going for it. I think it would be very easy to find it a real pain in the backside to draw this necklace. I initially didn't want to draw it myself, but I set myself, I think, 2.5 hours to just commit to doing it rather than to rushing it. And it really paid off, I think. It wasn't that hard to get it to look solid, just focusing on the shadows and the highlights of it, and it just came together quite well. And yeah, it just adds something that wouldn't be there if I'd just been like, right, I need to get this out of the way in like 10 minutes at the end. So if you look at her left shoulder and left elbow in particular, that's her left rather than the viewer's left. There's some like orangey tones. Now they're warmth. They're like from the warmth area of my palette. But I've added them through the colour layer on a layer above, which I've then kind of just blended in, then reduce the opacity. So it just gives a sense of luminance, similar to the highlights that I'm adding now. And yeah, these highlights, that's kind of, it's not a very bright highlight. It's kind of maybe about 75-80% up in the brightness scale of the palette. And it's a kind of desaturated yellow. And it just gives you somewhere you can push to when you want that extra brightness. I'd avoid going with same principle with her clasps in her hair there as a necklace. I didn't spend quite as long on that as I maybe would have liked to have done. I might revisit that at some point. But the principle's the same there, where it's just about kind of spending the time to make it look as good as you want it to look, not considering it finished until it's done. These very bright highlights here, that's added on a layer set to the blend mode, add, and then a little bit of Gaussian blur, only about 4 or 5% blur, and then reducing opacity a bit so it doesn't kind of dominate too much, and it just gives that real sense of like almost sunlight hitting it, and just really gives her skin that sense of luminance that really helps the picture come alive. And it's weird how these, to me anyway, it's weird how this like little stage, it's probably the easiest stage of the whole thing, of just adding these highlights, just makes the whole thing come to life. And it's just about coming to the end now, I think. I think in a second you'll see the whole image fairly close up. Yeah, just adding a bit more texture. And then here we go. So thanks for watching. This was my first tutorial, so please excuse my mumbling. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about it, to go into detail about anything that you'd like to know about. And also, if you have any requests or anything you'd like tutorials about, I'd be up for doing another one. I'll take requests for portraits you'd like me to draw. And that's it. Great. Thank you. Oh, and please add me on Instagram at Clint Eastwood Bradfield. Long story why, maybe I'll mention that in another tutorial. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.